Hey, are you the guest?
Hi, yeah.
Hi. Here's your hat.
What's this for?
For the shoot. Santa Claus.
Not Santa Claus!
Welcome to the 11th episode of FemgineerTV, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar, the founder of Femgineer. Femgineer is an education company where we teach innovators how to build software products so they can find freedom in their careers, enrich other people's lives, and make the tech world a lot more inclusive and flexible. We've heard a number of stories about founders who began their careers as engineers, designers, product managers, marketers, and salespeople. In all these roles, they were serving a software company. But what if you don't have one of those traditional roles in your background? And how do you get started as a founder building a software product? Well, today on FemgineerTV, we're going to be tackling this topic and dig into what it takes to be a founder, even if you don't have a background building software products. And to help us out, I've invited our special guest, Sandi MacPherson, who's the founder of Quibb. Hi, Sandi. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, really great to be here.
Yeah, so you've had a very interesting career, and I want to get into all of it and share it with our viewers. But before we get started, why don't we start by talking about your background? When you grew up in Canada, what did you aspire to be?
Yeah, so I'm from the very east coast of Canada, so a small city called Halifax, which is in the province of Nova Scotia. And growing up as a kid, I was always really interested in science. So I took in high school like as many electives as I could in biology, chemistry, some stats classes, physics. And so I always was really interested in science and wanted to do something around.
And so what was your first career?
Yeah, so I decided after high school, I decided to focus on environmental science in university, again, because I thought it was a really great interdisciplinary degree where you are able to take all of the sciences and sort of meld them together and come up with really interesting ways to study problems. And so that was, how I sort of got my start as my career as a scientist.
Nice. And so you went on to study climate change.
Yeah, so I went on, so after, when I graduated from university, I went to, I was actually the last couple of years of university of a internship program with the federal government, where they would place undergrads in federal departments and actually have them do real jobs inside of the government. And so I worked for what was called Environment Canada, which is kind of the Canadian equivalent of like the EPA. So I worked for them and I did some really interesting projects and I really liked them. So for example, there was one where we were trying to understand around a power plant, what is the fallout look of heavy metals in the environment around the power plant. And it's really expensive to run those types of tests, to set up that type of gear, to run those samples. And so we devised this really interesting way to look at moss and lichen that grew on trees nearby, to use them as indicators and to take samples of those to understand what the fallout was from the power plant. So it was like, I thought it was like really interesting work, and I really enjoyed it because I also got to do it like going out in the field, doing sampling, sending it off to the lab. I didn't actually do the lab work myself, but then taking back all of that data, running some models, running some statistical analysis on it, writing the report, and then coming up with recommendations. So it was really like an empowering role to go through that whole process. So in theory, I really liked it.
Yeah, and then you went from there. Was it right after that you decided to go to business school, or what eventually compelled you to go to business school?
Part of it was, so I did go to business school, and it was partially because working in the government, while it was really interesting, it was also extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
Because I would do all of this really interesting work that I found was really compelling, and I understood it so well. But what would happen would be, for example, there would be a change in the party that was leading the federal government. And all of a sudden, the projects that we were working on would just be scrapped or would be completely changed. And it was just really disheartening to spend so much time and effort on these projects that were then just cut. Another thing that would happen really frequently is I would go through this process, develop these studies, run them, and then the like end goal was to put it on a shelf in the library down the hall.
Okay.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And then I was sort of like, why did I just do that? Like,
Yeah.
why did I just like spend so much time and effort and think through this problem in such like a thoughtful way and expend so much energy on it when it's just going to end up on a shelf? And to this day, I still have no idea if anybody has ever read or even opened any of those.
Maybe years later.
Yeah, maybe.
Centuries,
Magically,
decades,
maybe I
yeah.
should go back and open one just so it'll see the light of day.
Yeah.
So I found that really frustrating. But at the same time, I recognized that I had all of this knowledge that I had amassed around the different sciences and how they interact in the world. And I was still really interested in that. And so I was like, okay, well, how else can I apply this knowledge? And how else is this interesting and valuable? And at that time, this was probably, I want to say, maybe 2008. Corporate social responsibility was really big.
Yeah.
And so understanding how businesses can be green and how businesses can have a positive impact related to sustainability. And I was lucky also because the Canada's Best Business School was also ranked #1 in the world for Sustainability Green MBA.
Okay.
And I was like, perfect. I was like, this is clearly what I should do. So I went to business school with that in mind to keep focusing on the environmental stuff, but with a little bit of a twist in terms of who I would be working for and the outcome of my work.
And then what happened after?
Yeah, so
school?
unfortunately,
Yeah.
so this sort of gets into like when and why I ended up coming down to the Valley.
Yeah. What lured you to
Yeah, yeah,
Silicon
well, it was
Valley
a
and the
little-
startup scene?
Yeah, it was a little bit, sadly, I was like, I talk about my like dual disillusionment moments. And one of them was when I was working for the government. And I was
Right.
just like, oh, this is like ending up on a shelf. And then the second moment was after near like the end of my first year of my MBA, when I realized that the same thing is gonna happen here. In a different way though, in the companies themselves that were touting themselves as being, you know, really progressive and concerned about the environment. Because I knew the science so well, I could kind of see through it.
Okay.
And I was like, no, they're not actually doing anything
Yeah.
interesting. And I felt I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't devote myself to something that I actually understand is not true and is
Right.
not actually having the outcome that people are talking about it as having. So that was really frustrating. So then at the end of my first year, I was kind of like, okay, well, I don't really want half an MBA. It's like I should
Right.
probably finish. And so I was like, okay, Sandy, if it turns out that you can actually do the environment stuff, what are your other options? And at that point, I had always been really interested in tech. While I'm not technical, I can't actually, well, I can code tiny bits, but I was always like the one person amongst my friends who knew sort of what was happening in the tech world a little bit.
Yeah.
Or like if some weird thing happened to someone's computer, they thought I would know. And so I kind of always had that role.
But you weren't an engineer or
But
designer or even a
No,
yeah,
I mean, not even
marketer.
HTML, CSS.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, not even WordPress.
Sure.
Like, nothing. And so it was thinking about, okay, maybe that's actually something interesting and compelling, and I would want to do that instead. And so I shifted my coursework to do more like design thinking classes,
Oh, great.
entrepreneurship, tech strategy classes. And that was what I focused on the second half of my MBA. And then it was also, I had kind of always, I recognize it now, but at the time I didn't. My dad has always been an entrepreneur.
Oh, in
and
what
so
field?
That's the thing, is like all of them.
Oh, okay.
Like
yeah.
a gold mine, emissions from power plants, media, like
Wow.
a lot of different things. And so it's been interesting to think about the fact that I think when you're young, you often think about careers and you're like, oh, what should I be and what can I be? And there's an array of possibilities open to you. So there's, you know, accountant, teacher, doctor, lawyer. And I think for me, because my dad was always an entrepreneur, to me that came across as just like any other career option. It was
You were like, all of
Dad's-
the above.
Yeah, like dad's an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
like he's done it. Like we've never, like he goes to work, he enjoys his job, he's like, that is what he does. And so to me, it very much felt like one of the like check boxes on what career do you want to have. Whereas I think a lot of people, sadly, they're like, people always use the term like jump off a cliff and make the leap, and it's like this really scary
Yeah.
thing to be an entrepreneur. And it's like, oh, like I never actually felt that way.
Right.
Because I had this role model showing me that like you can do this, like you can have a career that you enjoy and you think is compelling and you're excited about every day, and that is able to sustain you over your professional career, and you can improve in it, and it has all of these qualities that people, I think, are often afraid of when they think about entrepreneurship.
Well, especially even here in the Valley, there's always the fallback, right? You're like, well, worst case, I'll go back to writing code or designing products or writing copy. So I've got that skill in my back pocket versus I'm going to just go for it and be an entrepreneur as the first go. Yeah. Interesting. So what eventually drew you to move out to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so once I sort of made this decision around, okay, the MBA, CSR stuff idea isn't going to work, I do want to focus on tech. I started going to some events and meetup groups in Toronto to try to learn as much as I could. And what was interesting was one of the things that I was able to identify was, okay, this is kind of a risky like jump, like career change. I recognize that it is actually like a career change, which has inherent risk to it. But I was able to sort of pick out, I think one of the biggest ones that I actually have control over and can mitigate against is location. And I think if I want to be a tech person and potentially a founder or something, at that point I didn't really know, and I want to do that in Toronto, that'll be hard.
Okay.
Versus if I want to do that in the place in the world that is done like the best and has the best people and has the biggest networks and has the most understanding of how to do that type of thing, clearly that is a really like, in terms of all of the other risks that are oftentimes like amorphous and difficult to understand how to mitigate against, this was like, I just physically put myself there. Like it was like a very clear understanding around how do I get rid of that risk? I moved there.
Yeah.
And so it was, it came across as something where I knew how to do it. I knew that it would probably have a pretty big impact. And so I was just like, okay, that should be what I should do. So I moved down here.
Nice. Now, I moved here actually when I was 2. My family and I came here first when we came from India, and then my family and I moved to Texas, and kind of like yourself, after college decided, yes, got to be in the tech capital of the world as an engineer, and didn't really think about startups, but decided to come here and have pretty much been soldered to Silicon Valley since, which also means that I don't really have a fresh perspective after 11 years or more. So for yourself, since you are new, what are some of the things that you've thought of, or how do you think the Valley has like been inspiring for you?
Yeah. So I think I still remember like the very first couple of days that when I first moved here, I lived in Palo Alto. And I remember walking around Palo Alto and I was like, it's just like tiny little houses. I was like, what is this place? I was like, this is the like tech capital of the world. I was like, it's just like, and compared to Canadian houses, a lot of California houses are a little flimsy.
Right.
And I was like, all of these shacks, house.
We don't know how to build physical things here.
I was just like, what is up with this place? How can this be the place? And so I thought that was kind of funny. But otherwise, I definitely noticed really early on the difference in people's sort of understanding of, I recognize that what you're doing is really difficult, and I recognize that what you're doing requires the help of people like me, and so they were really willing to help and answer questions, and sort of recognizing that I knew nothing at that point. I was like ultimate noob. They were really understanding and helpful. And so definitely the people were like well beyond what I could have expected.
Yeah, different from the folks in the tech scene in Toronto or other places.
Yeah, because like I have like a distinct memory of going to an event in Toronto, and I know it's changed since then, and I'm not at all trying to say bad things about Toronto. But I went to this one event, and there was this one guy there who would not tell me what he was working on because he was afraid I would steal his idea. And so I think there's all of these characteristics associated with early like startup ecosystems that make it much more difficult to succeed. And again, that was this sort of like risk that I identified, and I was like, if I can like get myself out of that, then that'll be really beneficial. But it's also been really interesting because I've been here now for about 4 years. And it's been interesting even in that time to see the like shift happen. Because when I first got here, Palo Alto was still like most of the companies were being started there. Most of the people were based there. I would only go up to the city, like the stinky, dirty city, like once a month maybe. But it's been really interesting to watch that sort of shift happen, whereas now most of the companies are based in the city.
Right.
And now I only go down to the peninsula maybe like once every 2 months or something.
To get a tan.
Yeah, exactly. I clearly need one. I always need one. But it's funny, again, I think it just shows like the pace of things here are just like really, really quick, even when you are talking about physical things.
Right. Nice. So given this was 4 years ago, my book wasn't out yet. So how did you get your start building software products?
Yeah, so it was a lot of other books. So I did read a bunch of other books. The staple, I mean, like The Lean Startup was really helpful. Another one that I really liked was Jessica Livingston's Founders at Work. It was really great to actually like hear the stories of these people. And then a little bit more, again, not in the realm of like tactical versus not. Way up on this end of the spectrum, there's the Monk and the Riddle, Randy Commissar, which is again really great in terms of thinking about this like journey of being a founder and being an entrepreneur, which is really helpful to think about the sort of to get out of your day to day and get a bit more higher level.
But that's what you were focused on. You were focused more on thinking as a founder rather than like, how am I going to build a product?
Yeah, because at the same time, one of the things that happened was so I'm not technical, so I knew I couldn't just build like a new web app or a new mobile app. And so in thinking about what could I possibly do, I think, again, because I come from, because I have the MBA, what I've seen over the past few years when I see people who have a non-technical background, oftentimes who are MBAs, what they'll often start as their first company is usually an e-commerce one.
Yeah.
Because sort of there's like a thing that you market to people and then they buy it. And then it's like a well-understood business model that they learn about in school and that they can apply to being somewhat like tech-enabled. And so that was actually what I started with. So I started with a company that was, I started a mailing list with like Tiny Letter.
Yeah.
And then I had a Tumblr and tried to make those do some stuff together.
Great.
And that was the first thing that I worked on. And so it was interesting, I think, even though that is not at all like considered a tech product, it allowed me to start to understand like the language and to understand like all the different jargon and the different acronyms that are really important, irrespective of if you're working on something like that or if you're working on like a SaaS tool that you've built yourself. And so I think what happened over time is I'm trying to remember, I think my next product was still an e-commerce thing, but I think I had actually built something at that point. And then the next one was a little bit of like an e-commerce tool. And so looking back, there was definitely like a progression around like the complexity of the products themselves that I think probably matched and mirrored pretty well my progress in terms of understanding like what is a tech product and how do you make one. So it was an interesting journey, but I think it's one that oftentimes people are like, I need to learn to code.
Right.
But it's like,
or I need a technical co-founder.
Yeah, so I think like if you're really set on something and if that is really what you want to do, then sure. But if you really just want to like learn, then I think it's really important to just put something out in the world and get like just some basics understandings.
I like this, the stepping stone approach of let's try something, let's build from there and get a sense of what our learnings are, then move to the next rather than I'm going to learn to code and like dive right in. Oh, I don't really like to code. Okay, never mind. Or I've got to find a technical co-founder. Oh, recruiting is really tough. So it's nice to have these stepping points. And, one of the products that you were working on at the time when you were doing all these products was your current startup, Quibb. Can you tell us a little bit about what Quibb is and why you decided to focus on it?
Yeah, so Quibb is a way to get an understanding of what you need to know today to do your job. By looking at what peers and experts in your industry are reading every day. And so I started working on Quibb. It kind of came out of, it was kind of sort of, not really a pivot, but it was more that there were learnings out of a previous product, kind of like the final stepping stone, where I took those lessons and applied them to Quibb. And so Quibb was a little bit out of my thinking back to my MBA experience, where sharing links was always horrendous. I was on this like 8-person team to do this massive case study for the final 8 months of the program. And we would have links in emails, we would have links in chat, we would have links on our phones, we would have links. We literally had a Google Doc full of links. We like tried Delicious. and it was just horrible. It was really bad. And so I had that pain, and I kind of forgot about it, and I went and I worked on these e-commerce products. And then there was this moment where I was using Twitter. And it's interesting because I find that tech people oftentimes use products in weird ways. And not the like way that normies, I call them, like non-tech people use them. And so Twitter is one of them where I find that tech people use Twitter almost like a social RSS feed for work stuff. Whereas most people use it to like follow celebrities and like the shop down the street and like and their friends, like people who they actually know and have met in person and have a relationship with, versus a random person in another country that they've never talked to except about what is the like expected ARPU of this thing.
Oh yeah.
That is what like tech Twitter is, which is very
definitely
different. And so I was thinking about that and thinking about, hey, like this is actually really applicable to some of the problems that I was having in my MBA. And then kind of mashing those two understandings together to create Quibb.
Nice. So for our viewers out there, how can they use Quibb?
Yeah, so Quibb, so it's application only, so you can just go to quibb.com, sign up, and then how it works is you're able to share content that you're reading, things that you think are really interesting or compelling and help you do your job. And there's a daily email that gets sent out from everybody who you're following to see, so you can see what they're reading.
I love it because it's my daily digest. I don't sometimes even go onto Twitter now because I could just be like, oh, I wonder what my followers or my following is reading, and then I get the nice digest. So I appreciate that, and since I'm always in email, it's a great place to get the information. Now, the other thing that I thought was fascinating is we've had a lot of talk around fundraising on the show. We've had an investor and looked at fundraising through their lens, and we've had founders, but you've had a very, I think, interesting and probably the one approach that I thought was very, very compelling. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started in the fundraising process and what compelled you to take this unique approach?
Sure. So I bootstrapped Quibb for a while. And then it sort of got to the point where the holes that it was burning in my pocket were getting too big to ignore. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go out and raise some money. And for me, what happened was I was thinking, because I know sort of what the fundraising process looks like. I know that you have, probably some relationships with VCs in theory. If you're thinking about it somewhere down the road, you should probably know someone.
Or you have some friends who know VCs.
Friends who can intro you, or angels or other types of investors. And then the process looks like you make a pitch deck.
Right.
You drive up and down Sand Hill for 2 weeks to 20 weeks to 40 weeks.
Meditate, eat healthy, exercise,
and then you get term sheets, and then you do all the stuff.
Right.
And so that's sort of what it looks like. Whereas for me, I was sort of like, okay, well, wait a minute, let me think about fundraising. And let me just kind of take a step back and not just assume that that's the process that this should take. And for me, I was lucky because a lot of the people who use Quibb are tech people. There's a fair number of people on there who are active angels. There's a fair number of people who are like new angels. And there's also a bunch of people who are partners at firms, at venture firms. And so I was like, okay, I have the right people here already. Who better to raise my money from than the people who use my product?
Right.
Why would I go meet and introduce myself to people who I don't know, who have no understanding of who I am, of what I've been working on, of why I've been working on it, when I have clearly the best people right here in front of me.
Nice.
So that was sort of the idea behind it. And at that time, this was about, I want to say, a year and a half ago. And just 6 months prior, the Jobs Act came along. And what the Jobs Act allowed is the Jobs Act allowed for general solicitation. And so previously, if you wanted to raise money, like you mentioned, you've had guests talk about sort of the process and meeting investors and all of that stuff. And that's based on pre-existing business relationships with these people. And so that's typical fundraising. There's, on the other side, through the eyes of the SEC, the only other type of fundraising that existed as of, 3 years ago was an IPO. So you could either privately raise money from people that you knew or got interest to, or IPO. And there was no middle ground. And so what the Jobs Act did is it created this new middle ground where they then allowed general solicitation. So general meaning to the general public, soliciting meaning to ask for money. So for me, it was really important to raise the money from the people who had been there from day one, I had also always been really transparent in how I was building Quibb, and it goes back to the fact that I don't know what I'm doing because I have no experience in like a startup or a tech company.
Right.
And I recognize that a lot of the people who use it do that for their job and have done that for 10, 20 years. And so I was always really open in terms of like, I'm thinking about building a new feature. Should I? Let's talk to each other. And so all of these people who were using the product were really, they had been along a journey with me, and they knew what I was doing with this company.
They were invested in your product.
Yeah, exactly.
So why not?
Exactly. So why not be invested in other ways? And so when it was time for me to raise money, I realized that they were the best people. And I didn't set out to be like, I want to try out this new fundraising called general solicitation. Sure. It wasn't that. It was more a function of, in order for me to raise money from all of these people, I'm going to have to just like announce it. Mm-hmm. There's no way for me to, I'm not going to ping thousands of people and say like, hi, I don't know if you're an investor, but if you are, let me know. And so I had to publicly announce it, which meant I would fall under general solicitation. And so it's still pretty rare. I haven't yet met many companies who have done it. And again, oftentimes it doesn't really make sense unless you have a user base or a member base where they actually are really interested and excited in becoming a part owner in your company. But for me, it made a lot of sense. And so I ended up doing, I have a couple of firms in my round, but all of the people who were at those firms were using the product, and then a fair number of angels. And then I used a platform out of BetaWorks that's called Acquire. It was called AlphaWorks at the time, to manage the investing of people who wanted to invest smaller amounts, so like as small as $1,000. Yeah. They still had to be accredited, though. So to qualify under general solicitation, everybody has to be an accredited investor. Mm-hmm. But what Acquire does is it takes all the work out of, they on the back end go and do the accrediting. And so they make sure that the people are accredited investors and meet all the standards of the SEC. And then they bundle that all up into a special purpose vehicle that then sits on the cap table. So I used their platform to help manage that little chunk of the round.
Nice. So what was the end result of your round, if you're open to sharing? Yeah,
so I have some great institutional investors. Yeah. So Bloomberg Beta, who is kind of near here, actually. Yeah. Lightbank, which is in Chicago. Slow Ventures, which they're also based around here. And then BetaWorks. Mm-hmm. And then probably like 8 or 9, I think, angels, people from LinkedIn and PayPal and News Corp. And then the angels are the tiny angels through Choir are just people who, a lot of them are people who are like, I really like Quibb. I use it all the time. This is really great that you're making this accessible and open to me. So they were really excited about that part of it.
That's fantastic. Now you've really thrust yourself into the Valley here. You've started building a couple products, built a company, fundraised, and most recently started a new project, which I'm pretty excited about. Can you share your other project that you're working on when you're not building Quibb?
Yeah, so this is my hobby. So I'm boring, and this is my hobby. So it's called the 50-50 Pledge. Mm-hmm. And what was happening was, so I recognize that being a woman founder is kind of rare. And people recognize that, and there's all of these, there's a lot of people these days talking about diversity in tech, and one of the sort of modes of that they're talking about a lot is women. Right. And for me, one of the things that would happen all of the time was I would meet with people, oftentimes men, who would ask me, Sandy, how do we replicate you? How do we make more of you?
It's called cloning.
We want this to happen. You've done it. How do we encourage more of this? And so I am more than happy to entertain that question and give my perspective on it. But it was happening so often. And then I sort of sat back and I was like, okay, has that changed anything? Is that person going to actually do anything differently now because of what I said? Are they going to do something that I'll have any understanding of and that I'll see and that we'll be able to recognize that's because I spent that time talking to that person? And I was like, I don't know if I can say yes to that question. And so again, being I think it's after getting in this founder mode, it's I can't measure or understand the impact that's
also
having.
Also
a scientist. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm doing that several times a week, that's cumulatively a lot of time. Mm-hmm. So maybe I should take that time out and instead spend it on something else where I can actually feel more confident that it's doing something and it's moving the needle and it's actually making the change that I think should exist. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what can I do? What are some of the higher leverage activities that would work like in an interesting way around this? And I came up with the idea of getting more women speakers on stage at tech industry events. And so that's the idea behind the 50/50 pledge. And it's, so I partner with events that sort of I choose, and I'm being a little bit selective currently in terms of who I partner with. And then I work with them. Once they've made the pledge, they say, yes, we're going to have 50% of our speakers are going to be women at this event. I then work with them with a directory that I have that currently I think is like 2,300 women have signed up, that I can then customize. Like, we need some mobile attribution people.
Right.
I can be like, okay, yes, I have some of those. Here's some suggestions, and work with them to try to get really great, really like targeted and niche speakers at their event. Because one of the things I think is that some people have like, in terms of pushback on this, they're like, oh, well, we can't
They just don't exist.
We can't just, or they don't,
Yeah.
there's like, they don't exist. And then also people are like, well, I don't want to just put a woman on a stage just cause. And I'm like, I don't want that either. Like, nobody wants that. But the thing is that these women do exist.
Right.
And I think what I sort of identified was that there's, it's basically a two-sided marketplace, and there's no communication between the two sides. And if I could build something in the middle that would connect the speakers to the events, then that would actually be really powerful and would enable them to get the right speakers for their events that also happen to be women.
Yeah. And I know this is a problem given the work that I'm doing right now, because in general, just finding good speakers is a challenge, and people who have those niche backgrounds is also critical. So for our viewers out there who might be either interested in being an event sponsor or who are speakers themselves, how can they get involved?
Yeah, so just 5050pledge.com.
Okay.
And there's a sign-up form for both women speakers and event organizers.
Last question for you. What do you wish you had known before you'd gotten started in tech?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that people always talk about is how hard it is to be a founder. And I think I knew that going into it. And I was like, yeah, okay, like, I'm ready. Like, I can do it. Like, I've had some ups and downs in my background. Like, I'm tough. I can handle that. But it's definitely, like, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of things also that I've gotten better at, but it's still something that I'm trying to improve around, just like decision making. I find decision making is so important when you're a small company. And in the early stages, it's so easy to make one decision that drastically alters the like potential outcome of your company. That it's something that I think everybody should really spend some time on understanding how to make decisions. And then I think also in terms of it being really hard, I think one of the things that I found really valuable is just having a couple people around you, even like just two is enough, who have been a founder and who actually sort of know what it's like, have been a founder in theory at like the same level and stage as you. And then also just somebody else who maybe not a founder, but has been in the tech industry and who you can actually talk shop with, but the other side of it. In a way that's really helpful and supportive. I think that's really, really important. And I wish I've definitely figured that out over time. But it's something that I probably should have got a jump start on a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so having a support network is important.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks again to our special guest, Sandi MacPherson, for joining us today.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah. And to all of you viewers out there for tuning in. And of course, our sponsor, Pivotal Tracker, for helping in producing this episode of FemgineerTV. And if you've enjoyed this episode of FemgineerTV, then please share it with your teammates, your friends, and your boss. And let us know in the comments below what your favorite part of this episode was. That's it for the first season of FemgineerTV. We'll be back in 2016 with all new episodes, so subscribe to Femgineer's YouTube channel to know when they're out. Thanks for tuning in to our first season, and from all of us here at FemgineerTV, Happy Holidays!
This episode of FemgineerTV is brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. Build better software faster.
Hey Sandy, thanks for joining us today. And that'll be your cue to just be like, thanks for having me.
Yay, potatoes!
Yeah, awesome. We wish you happy holidays. Sorry, I messed that up. My cue is on.
It's like starting off the line. It's like a flag.
Okay. Hey, it's Purnima. As you know, I'm working on my second book. It's called Present, The Techies Guide to Engaging an Audience. And this time, I'm co-authoring it with Karen Catlin.
Purnima and I are both technical women who have given hundreds of talks, but in the beginning, they weren't all exactly great. Now we have studied the greats, we have learned from our mistakes, and we wrote the book we wish we had had when we started our public speaking journey.
The book is available now for pre-order, so check it out, and if you like it, which we're pretty confident that you will, reserve your copy today.